Good evening, and thank you all for joining us for this important discussion on citywide strategic planning for the District of Columbia. My name is Roger Mohammed, and I'm the founder of Peace for DC, a new initiative to bring funding in order to lift up community organizations doing the work to reduce gun violence in our city. On behalf of Peace for DC's Executive Director, Rachel Usdan, and me, we want to thank Next Level Vision and Moms Demand Action's DC chapter for co-hosting with us tonight. And we really want to thank all of the peacemakers who have joined us and are working in community and government to make DC a place where everyone can not just survive, but thrive. I'd like to introduce Deshola Dawkins, who is a partner in this effort, who I met through Moms Demand Action, to explain what she's doing to stop gun violence in DC. Deshola, are you there?
Yes, thank you so much, Roger, for that. So also, I want to welcome everyone for being a part of this phenomenal event tonight. My name is Deshola Dawkins. I am the founder of Next Level Vision, and we founded Next Level Vision as an initiative for my son who transitioned 8 years ago, August the 21st, 2013. And we're just trying to carry out his legacy. My son, Timothy Dawkins, left us a message that I later found out. And I'm trying to continue his legacy. So he says that we're going to instill the right kind of confidence in our people and take our community back square mile by square mile. And so I hope that today's event will inspire and motivate you to do just that. And we're also asking and inviting you all to be a part of Next Level Vision. And you can check us out at Next Level Vision DC. I mean, that's my email, but Next Level Vision DC at gmail.com. And you can also check the website out, Next Level Vision, and then Next Level Vision. So our motto is to organize, strategize, and mobilize. And our mission statement is to build a networking partnership with our community leaders to form and inform our families of available resources and programs. We want to inspire and encourage leaders to organize, strategize, and mobilize in unity and love. Our vision statement is to change the culture of our community from gun violence to love and not hate. We are working with all organizations who are willing to work in unity and share the responsibility of taking our generation to the next level vision. Thank you, Roger.
Thank you, Deshola. Gun violence takes a deeply inequitable toll on communities and people of color in the district, with homicide rates in some neighborhoods more than 30 times the national average. But gun violence also impacts all of us. And if we're ever to make progress to eliminate gun violence in DC, I believe we all have a role, from businesses to foundations, to sports teams, to every member of government and community. I want particularly tonight to acknowledge the victims and survivors of gun violence who join us. I've learned a lot from many of you, including Deshola, who have known suffering longer and deeper than I have. Thank you for your dedication in the face of unspeakable tragedies. Thank you for all your courage and the will to go on to create change. Now to strategic plans. We know that some folks in DC are skeptical of the need for a comprehensive or strategic plan for gun violence reduction. They're cumbersome. Many people know already what needs to be done, and many people just want to focus on the work. We all have the same goal after all, to eliminate gun violence for everyone on every street in DC. But a famous author and a pioneer of aviation once said that a goal without a plan is just a wish. And like any complex systemic problem, we can't wish gun violence away. And we can't make goals that we don't know how to make. So to me, it's great news that as a city, a plan is going to come together. But the goal for tonight isn't to tell anyone what to do. We're not here to design the strategic plan. We're here to introduce the concept and share that from experts, both nationally and in community. We're here to discuss how we can build the interdisciplinary coalition of people to get agreement on goals and understand the process necessary to build an actionable plan. Our intention is to add just one piece to the vital conversation. This process includes talking about DC's strengths that we can hone in on, as well as some of our weaknesses. We don't have all the answers, but we know we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We can learn from successes and mistakes all over the country while we focus on what works here at home. So this conversation is just one window, not intended to be comprehensive or to include the entire community, but to share a few perspectives. And this dialogue must continue. We need many more conversations. In the coming months, we will hold other panels on the economic costs of gun violence in DC and the impacts of trauma from gun violence for everyone involved. But we're just one voice among many. And let's be clear, whatever plan the city creates must include everyone impacted by gun violence. Tonight's session is being recorded so that we can make it available to those who weren't able to attend. So if you don't wish to be recorded, please make sure your camera's off and your name doesn't appear. We invite everyone on tonight to participate in the chat, and we will include time for as many questions as possible later. I come to this work as a Washington, DC native, and also as a survivor of DC's plague of gun violence. 3 years ago, yesterday, my only son, Tom, was killed just driving home from his first job out of college, working with returning citizens on job training at So Others Might Eat. My journey through grief and trauma has taken me to a place where I believe Tom would want me to be, not wallowing in self-pity, not focusing on his memory alone, but continuing in his spirit to lift up the communities and individuals who have suffered and continue to suffer the most from gun violence. I admire and feel deeply for those who've been working longer than I have to eliminate gun violence and who have suffered from it in our city and around the nation. And I hope that my voice can help amplify the efforts of everyone else. And in joining with you, we can do more. And so that takes me to this place as a convener and hopefully someone who can help guide a discussion that's focused on solutions. So in brief, I'd like to introduce our panel. David Mohammed is the Executive Director of the National Institute for Criminal Justice Reform, also known by some as Nick Jr. He's a national leader in the fields of criminal justice, violence prevention, and youth development. He's worked extensively with cities, juvenile justice systems, and probation departments across the country. David has roots in DC. He is a former chief of committed services for DC's Department of Youth Rehabilitation Services and a graduate of Howard University's School of Communications. He recently completed a landscape analysis of Washington, DC community-based services and Supports for Gun Violence Reduction, which we'll put in the chat. And David is also currently tasked with conducting additional analysis and drafting a strategic plan for gun violence reduction in DC. Also joining us is Thomas Abt. Thomas is a senior fellow at the Council on Criminal Justice, where he currently chairs the Council's Violent Crime Working Group, and he recently directed its National Commission on COVID-19 and Criminal Justice. Prior to joining the Council, Thomas served as a senior research fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School and held leadership positions in the New York Governor's Office and the Office of Justice Programs at the US Department of Justice. He's a leading expert on reducing city gun violence. His book, Bleeding Out: The Devastating Consequences of Urban Violence and a Bold New Plan for Peace in the Streets, explores evidence-based, cost-effective approaches to reduce high rates of violence. My copy of his book is heavily dog-eared, and I've shared this title with many friends, government officials, and acquaintances. Thank you, Thomas, for joining us. Now, more locally, Tyrone Parker is a founding member and present executive director of the Alliance of Concerned Men, a local nonprofit that I'm sure many of you are familiar with. The Alliance has been around for decades, doing violence interruption before that's what it was called, as well as promoting peaceful conflict resolution, life skills training, and other violence prevention and intervention efforts. Mr. Parker and the Alliance of Concerned Men are one of many hometown heroes, brave, tireless peacemakers who helped DC go from the murder capital in the 90s to a low of 88 homicides in 2012. To Mr. Parker and all of the original peacemakers, we're grateful for the work that you've done and continue to do. And finally, David Bowers is Vice President and Mid-Atlantic Market Leader for Enterprise Community Partners. His work includes facilitating affordable housing and community development transactions and policy implementation in collaboration with public and private sector stakeholders in the Baltimore and DC metropolitan areas. For over 2 decades, publicly, David has been an advocate for not just a comprehensive plan to reduce gun violence, but a plan to end gun violence in DC as the founder of the all-volunteer No Murders DC movement. David has demanded benchmarks and accountability from the DC government, hosted candidate forums, monthly panels, and been a member of the city's comprehensive homicide elimination task force, and has been as focused as anyone and as thorough on the goal of no murders as anyone. So, DC has lots of programs, lots of strategic plans, from a Vision Zero for pedestrian and bicycle safety to 3 separate plans for aging. But we're just building our Vision Zero for gun violence. And our strategies and offices remain separate, not just by agency, but also sometimes by goals and ideas. Thankfully, that is hopefully about to change. And like many cities, we are embarking on the process of creating a plan. I'd like to start, David Mohammed, by asking you, just more broadly, what is a comprehensive or strategic plan for gun violence reduction, and why are they important?
Thank you, Roger. First, I just want to say good evening to everyone. It's great to see so many familiar faces, some recent, some long. I want to add on, I think you had wonderful words for Tyrone. I just want to say, Tyrone's been doing this work. Good to see you, brother, for a long time. He's younger than me, but good to see you, man. And as you said, there are heroes in DC who have done the work on the ground, who were doing this before we had these fancy names to it. So I just want to thank Tyrone and Alaska Sermon and others, and there's many others on this call as well. So I'm just happy to be a part of this discussion, as well as, you know, extraordinary colleagues like Thomas, who I've known for a while and appreciate, as we all said, the book, who I haven't had a chance to say this to him. If I've told so many people to buy it, I better get a cut or something. Anyway, so in terms of a strategic plan, you know, one of the challenges, so the landscape analysis, which I see has been put in the chat, is we looked at you know, a lot of work. I'll sum it up with what I've been saying recently. I spent all day Thursday with folks on the ground in DC, with the One's office, with building blocks, with the U.S. Attorney's office, with the deputy mayor and city administrator and others, talking about a strategic plan. But in all of those meetings, I mentioned that, you know, DC has extraordinary talent. Like, you know, in terms of this work, some of the best talent. I have the pleasure, as well as some of the pain, of doing this work in several cities, and not just because, you know, DC is my second home, and because I'm on this seriously. DC has some extraordinary talent in this work, and the ability and the resources, right? So there is this kind of perfect storm of potential, but we've got the challenge of coordination, the challenge in some sense of political will, the challenge of focus and strategic plan, right? So a strategic plan, one, needs to be clear. You know, I know we're going to talk a little bit later, but I'll maybe repeat. It needs to be clear what you're trying to achieve. I've just got to say, this has been the biggest challenge I have experienced in the country, aligning your desired outcomes with your programs or your services or your actions. And so the example I give, which really happened to me on a city on the East Coast, was I was talking to a city council member in a city, and she said, you know, we want to reduce homicides in the next year, right? So meaning the next 12 months, and we're going to launch a mentoring program for middle school students. And a mentoring program for middle school students is wonderful. It will never, ever, ever achieve gun violence reduction in the next 12 months, right? And so it's really understanding, aligning your goals with your desired goals, with your action, your programs. What most people who are not deeply involved in this work don't realize, so in DC, the average age of a homicide suspect is 29 years old, right? And so we're talking about an older population. Yes, the teenagers make the news, it's in our heads. Teenagers are driving some of the carjackings, don't get me wrong, but the shootings and the homicides are young adults, in their 20s, right? And even 30s. And so that's just one point, is age, let alone the several other points in terms of, but the short version, I'll just say, Roger, and then we can go on to someone else, is what is our plan to engage the 25-year-old with 7 previous arrests, who is a vowed member of his neighborhood crew, who's not looking for service. He's not knocking down doors. Yet somebody we need to invest in, we need to love on, we need to engage, and that we can, right, stop from being the next victim or perpetrator of a shooting. I would say from the data that we have, I'll talk a little bit more about this later, from the data that we have and the work that we're doing with the district, is probably about 75% of all shootings, so a huge amount of it, is amongst a small population who have very similar risk factors. The violence is very predictable, and therefore it is preventable. And if a strategic planning around this is understanding who that is, having real focus on those individuals for intensive intervention that's structured, that's engaged over time, that's very intentional about reducing gun violence. There's a bunch of other goals, reducing recidivism and improving high school graduation rates and eradicating poverty. There's all type of other goals that things that are near and dear to my heart. But when we're talking about reducing gun violence, there's a specific population to focus on and some specific set of interventions that have been proven effective. And we have to develop a plan that's specific to that. And then what are the metrics that we're going to collect? What are the objectives we're trying to achieve? And let's manage the hell out of those objectives and those metrics.
That's great. And Thomas, I'd love to sort of have you carry on from that, because David mentioned focus, which is a huge theme in your book, and also how we manage around this, and manage not just meaning the government, but everyone who's engaged in this goal. In the book, you present the concept of a framework for gun violence reduction. And I think from my layman's opinion, that's a way to frame a plan, but you call it a conceptual tool used to organize collective action. Can you elaborate on what that means?
Sure, Roger. It's a pleasure and a privilege to be with you today, with you and Rachel, and everyone else on the call today, with my co-panelists, all of whom I admire, David, Tyrone. It's great to be with you again. And also, I see a lot of friends and colleagues on the call generally, and a lot of really important players in the DC conversation. So I'm just glad to be a part of this conversation. So here's what I'll say about frameworks. You know, in my book, Bleeding Out, I really tried to basically create a how-to guide for how to save lives based on the best evidence we had available. You know, we summarized or synthesized the results of over 1,400 individual impact evaluations, but also just going across the country and doing the hard work of talking to mothers and fathers who had lost children, beat cops, former gang members, former shooters, and really trying to understand the view from the community and the view from the academy. And one of the things that was really encouraging is that overall, while people use different language, they were really talking about some of the same things. And so what we learned was that, you know, there's really no one simple solution to reducing gun violence. Any effective strategic plan is going to have several moving pieces. And so in order to organize that, you need some type of framework to help with that. And there's no magic to this. I want to be really clear. There's no perfect framework. And the only measure of a good framework is how useful it is in organizing folks to do what you want to get done. You know, in general, I think that good frameworks are informed by evidence, but they're not so wonky and scientific that they can't be accessible by all the people who need to use it, by the practitioners using language that people recognize and understand. And the framework's got to sort of set out a reasonably complete and accurate vision of both the problem that you want to solve and the solution on how you're gonna actually solve it. The framework that I set out in my book has sort of elements of prevention, intervention, and enforcement, and then people, places, and behaviors. And so I set that out in the book, and I hope it's useful. But if it isn't useful, or if it needs to be tweaked, or then, you know, do what you got to do. But I think ultimately, for me, the most important thing is that you get folks on the same page and you get to work. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you so much. So David Bowers, you've been calling for a strategic plan for over 2 decades publicly in DC. How do we get people on the same page? How do we advance it from a goal and a wish and to something real?
Yeah, thanks, Roger, for the question. And let me add my thanks to you and Rachel and Peace for DC for bringing us all here together. And thanks to all of you all who are here. I see we've got over 175 folks on the line. It's so great to see that kind of commitment on a rainy Monday night in the nation's capital. So thank you all. Roger, a couple of things come to mind in answering that question. I think how we get there, one, we have to have an honest conversation with each other, with ourselves and with each other, that since I started December 22nd, 2000, which was my late mother's birthday, and that's why I remember the first day I walked down 8th Street Northeast asking people if they thought we could end murder in DC. It's been 20 years. 3,796 people died since the beginning of 2021 until the latest MPD stat. 3,796. That's more than on 9/11. In a city that was at the time roughly 60% Black, now 47% Black, over 90, 95% consistently percent of those folks tend to be Black, tend to be male, tend to be from a certain part of town, tend to be from a certain socioeconomic background. Not all, but the overwhelming majority. So the first thing we got to do is have an honest conversation. Why have we let that happen? We, all of us, mayors, council members, preachers, sorority folk, fraternity folk, business owners, nonprofits. Why have we tolerated that? Myself, why have we tolerated that? And let's have an honest conversation about that. So that's one piece, I think. And this gathering tonight, I think, is part of that movement, the movement to build the will, the heart to get there. Second thing I would say is that, yes, you're right. We've called on this for 20 plus years publicly. The first time we met with former Mayor Anthony Williams, we asked for performance benchmarks for every city agency related to the prevention of homicide. Why? Because we had a principle beyond the fact that one murder is one murder too many, the notion of we have to institutionalize the movement. Using the religious language of my background, we have to make the movement incarnate in the people. Business language is institutionalized. So no matter if Tyrone is here or not, the Alliance of Concerned Men or Peaceaholics or No Murders DC, Mayor Bowser, Mayor Gray, Mayor Fenty, Mayor Williams, no matter who comes or goes, it's built into the code. So we have to help people understand the difference between a pilot initiative and building into the code. The police department doesn't come and go with a new administration. Parks and Rec, DC, the public schools don't come and go with who the new preacher is or the new business owner, new head of the Chamber of Commerce or the Board of Trade. So we have to help people understand that, have an honest conversation, help people understand the power of institutionalizing it so that the recommendations that a Mr. Mohammed, that a Thomas Abt make in their work, there's a place, a hub, what I call a peace room, for that work to happen all day, every day. And it's someone's job to do that all day, every day, the coordination and all of that, and the like. And so last thing I would say in answering the question is that I do think that with the creation of the gun violence prevention director position that Director Harper's in, the Emergency Operations Center, I've told people that I feel like we're 60% of the way there, right? In terms of people starting to get the framework. Oh, right, you need this position in the city administrator's office. Yes, you need to have cross-agency and cross-sector work going on. Where we haven't got, so we've made a lot of progress. Kudos to all those involved in that advocacy, including many who are on this line. I think the next piece of the pump is there are a few pieces that are missing, right? The adequate staffing, right? But built it into the budget baseline. The fact that it can't be an emergency response, it's got to be permanent staffing, right? Staffed adequately over time. That if we can get over that hump, and all due respect to the conversation about gun violence prevention, what I've said, no, it's got to be homicide elimination. Because one murder is one murder too many, right? So again, we're on the road there for sure. But I think that we got a little ways to go. And so I think we should acknowledge progress made, but also not hang up the banner on the boat saying mission accomplished.
And I appreciate you, and it's not the first time that you've, opened my eyes to not just wanting reduction, but wanting elimination and needing every single life to count and every single life to be saved. Mr. Parker, Tyrone, in your opinion, if David says we're 60% there, how do we get the other 40? How do we build that coalition, that cross-sector group where it's not just the folks who've been working on this for decades, but everyone?
Thank you, Roger, for bringing us together in the spirit of transformation and building a real comprehensive movement that's going to be in a collaboration with everybody that's involved with it. I'm blessed to be able to be a part of this work, have been a part of it for the last 30 years, which gives me the real vision and insight to be thankful to seeing David Mohammed and David Bowes and Thomas and yourself coming together for the purpose of this very exciting conversation. I know that, as I look at the audience and that's a part of this conversation, and I know that beyond a questionable doubt, that each and every one of them have an input into how we can get there. From my perspective, I would say, and we're already there to a large degree. David stays 60%. Thomas stays from the perspective that let's move some components aside to make sure that we can make it happen. I think by virtue of the work that we've been doing for the last 30 years tells me one thing, that the people in our communities are looking for direction. The people in our communities want transformation. So you already have a number of folks that are willing to take the deep dive, to do the things that need to be done for transformation and the greater good of their community. The challenge is, how are we able to get the resources to be able to move the red tape aside so that we will be able to get to the point that we can get to. And it's not new. I say not new in the sense that we have done this work before, and we have been able to reduce the numbers of homicides to the point that of 88. Sure, folks may say, well, new faces, same needs are there to be able to help the transformation of. And this is what our mission is today. Our mission is to bring conversation to the table that has the capacity of unifying us all in one way. Because one thing is for sure, a number of us are accustomed to making something out of nothing. And this is the history that we've been able to do in regards to the streets, in regards to the community. We created ideas where there was no best practices or no evidence base. We had to conceptualize, how do we make our community safer and eliminate the homicides and the violence that was occurring? That's the challenge that we got to be able to come back today and be able to say, how do we unify our community? And the first step, I think, to unify our community is to have a real conversation, as David had made mention. Take a real hard look at what are the causes that are circumventing us from coming together as a whole. And we're going to get there because in heart, we are there.
Thank you, Tyrone. That's really great. I guess the question, just to finish this section, is how do we get the right people around the table? Thomas, in your book, you talk about a task force in place, a tight group of people around the table, not too big, not too small, but well-funded, well-staffed with what you call the local A team. And I love that description, and I guess for either Tyrone or David Bowers, is not naming specific people, but what in your mind is the local A team? What sorts of folks at the table? And then from David Mohammed and Thomas's perspective, if you can just follow that with what you have seen work elsewhere.
I defer to my wise elder Tyrone, and we'll let him go first.
Well, it's a good move.
This is a blessing for the elder. But the good thing about that is that as I had stated before, we have so many people, so many community-minded individuals. We have a natural resource that have not been tapped in these particular communities that are looking for ways to get into this fight for the purpose of bringing about public safety, community building, family strengthening. They are there. We have an obligation to be able to open that floodgate, to bring them into the equation that they are dying to get involved with. We have just got to blow the bugle, have a locations that they can come in and offer their ideas and their input and their commitment and hear them sincerely. Don't let their ideas or their commitment or their beliefs go in vain. We so often have conversations where we had the city bringing individuals in and we had the panels, but the community have ideas that life is not blown into. Blow life into some of these grassroots ideas where their natural resources are at, wanting to make transformation and can work. There's nobody on this panel that knows their communities as well as the individuals that are from their communities. Give them what they need to uplift it. This is the thing that I say. Move the red tape. Give them hope. Give them support. But even more than that, give them respect to know that they have solutions within themselves.
And I would pick up on that, Roger, by adding to what Tyrone said. I think really our approach is it's identifying what I say, it's not the man, it's the plan. Somebody said many years ago in the civil rights movement, right? So it's about the sector, not the specific organization all the time. So being clear, I remember when the Homicide Elimination Strategy Task Force legislation was put on some legislation back in the late 2000s. There were 20 sectors identified, right? So everything, yes, it includes law enforcement and all that comes with that, and the legal side of that, the enforcement side. But it also means you've got victim survivors groups, you've got mental health groups, you've got police, you've got folks who do employment, for-profit and nonprofit, right? You've got sports teams, you got the music industry. There's a range of sectors and voices, because part of it is we have to help people understand we all have a part to play. And I think that's been one of the challenges in getting for local government to say, yes, create that infrastructure that transcends, bring all of these folks to the table, and understand that I can't throw rocks and say, you, Mr. or Mrs. Mayor or Mr. or Mrs. Council member, didn't get it done. No, it's we, right? If I'm at the table as a preacher, if I'm at the table as a business owner, if I'm at the table as a fill in the blank, I've got to say, if the government's supposed to do 3 widgets and 2 screws, and I'm supposed to do 1 nail, then when we go around the table, they're going to ask, did you do your nail? And was it effective in helping to reduce homicides? And so building that kind of, knowing that every sector has to be there. We have literally had government officials say to us over the 20 years, yeah, everyone would agree with this, like mom and apple pie, but we can't say it publicly, because if we fail, people are going to, if we don't hit the mark with 0, people are going to say we failed. And so that's why you have to make sure you bring folks in, one, because you need to, because it's going to take all of us in different ways. But also it holds people accountable. Last 2 things I'll say real quickly. I used to always use the imagery of when President Kennedy, for my time, but when President Kennedy said, we're going to send a man to the moon, right? The person doing avionics and the person who was doing rocket fuel and the person who was doing insulation were all doing their work somewhere. But it wasn't until somebody said, this is the vision of where we're going to, and pulled them together, working in a systematic, structured way every day towards that goal, that all of that comes together. It's the same thing with getting to 0 on homicides. There's somebody doing mental health. There's somebody who's got a job. There's somebody who's doing law enforcement, but they have to be brought together every day saying, this is the North Star. Last thing I'll say here and then pause is that almost 20 years ago, there was a national expert, quote unquote, in this field. And I thought of what he said almost 20 years ago, and I read Mr. Mohammed's recent report. And he said to me, Bowers, DC could reduce its homicide numbers in half in about 4 years if they only grew up. And that's almost a direct quote from 20 years ago. I'll never forget it. He said, if they only grew up. What did he mean? As has been said here by others, we have the expertise. We have people from, whether it's impacted communities, academics, think tanks, or whatever. But as Mr. Mohammed's report said, we don't work smart together. for whatever reasons. And I think that's going to be a big part of the challenge for us. If we can get over that hump, we should see real progress.
So David, Mohammed, can we go to you next and just, is there a structure that works in terms of centering the work in community and coordinating the work better? I look to Oakland Unite as an example, and then Thomas, you can follow up. I've also looked to New York City's crisis management system. It seems to me that there's an intentional effort to center the work in community, to lift up community organizations, but to help with the funding and the coordination. Is that right? Is that wrong? And is there more to it?
Yeah, I have about 2-3 hours for this answer. Briefly, I would say I think a lot has been said, if not all, by Tyrone and David. But in terms of a couple of quick pieces, Oakland Unite, which is now called the Department of Violence Prevention in Oakland, is the citizens, the voters of Oakland passed legislation, local ballot initiative, to raise a small, pretty mild parcel tax to fund violence reduction services, also funding for police. It's a longer, interesting story about two rival ballot initiatives coming together. But that produces, and Oakland, the size is only 420,000 people. It produces about $10 million a year specifically for violence reduction services. There is a separate fund for prevention, $17 million a year, the Kids First prevention plan funding. This is specifically for violence reduction. We didn't start that smart in the beginning. That's another long story. We learned in terms of the need to have prevention and intervention. And then the third, which we don't have yet, but community transformation. But this fund is managed by the city, but 90% of it is put into the community. So it's community-based organizations from around the city that street outreach, hospital-based violence intervention and response, life coaching, which is focused on the very highest risk guys, as well as violence interrupters who respond to scenes and do mediation, and employment services who hold slots for this population of very highest risk, housing support services, cognitive behavioral therapy, and mental health services. All of this funded by the city on top of all of the county, state, federal, and philanthropic dollars. So it's quite a bit amount of resources. That being said, DC too has quite a bit of resources. But the way that the Department of Violence Prevention in Oakland, used to be called Oakland Unite, is able to organize and coordinate it, and then it merged a bit, long story with a lot of detail, with the gun violence reduction strategy, known locally as ceasefire, but there's some bad things that happen in cities in the name of ceasefire. So gun violence reduction strategy in Oakland. And it's really focused to say, so for instance, there are very prescriptive contracts between the city and community-based organizations that say you will have 5 life coaches and they will serve 10 people on their caseloads each who are the very highest risk of gun violence based upon this data-driven assessment. And you're going to talk to them every day and see them 3 to 4 times a week and do a case note every time you have a contact with them. And that creates both community-driven work, but also accountability and coordination that we have not seen in many other places. The last thing I'll say about this, about DC, is you have this wealth of, right? So the ONE's office and building blocks and the Office of Victim Services, hospital-based work, with some of there's discussion in the chat about that, the Parks and Rec roving leaders. All right, you've got these government agencies, all with folks in the community, then let alone DYRS and C-Social and Court Social Services and pretrial, right? There's a lot going on. And then you've got the ton of extraordinary community-based organizations in the city. And so although that is mostly a good story, there is this point of the great need for coordination. And so the last thing I'll say on this is, again, to just use an example, right now, tonight, I will wager that there is somewhere on social media somebody in DC either taunting or threatening or putting something on social media that is clearly showing that there's somebody at high risk of engaging in gun violence. And it's not just playtime music video. They also have a background that says that's serious, right? And whose responsibility is it to identify that, to dispatch a specific person or people to them, to engage, outreach to them, to engage them and connect them into some intensive services, and whose responsibility is to check tomorrow to see what has it been done, to check the next day to see what's going on with that, and to check the next week and to check the next month. That level of intensive engagement and intensive management is what's missing.
Thomas, do you want to follow up on that? And I would like to take one or both of you on that specific point to something that hasn't been done broadly or in my perspective successfully in DC, which is called many things: group violence reduction strategy, focused deterrence. But I'll let you just amplify what David just said first, if you'd like.
Sure. Well, first, I absolutely agree with everything David said. And I think there's sort of a bunch of lessons in what he said that maybe I can help draw out. I think, when I talk about this work, I often say that it needs to be community informed, meaning informed by the lived experiences of impacted individuals and communities at every step of the policymaking process. I don't say community-based, and I don't say evidence-based, because I don't think there's any one group that has a lock on how this is supposed to work. And I think that, in fact, what we really need is a partnership between the government and its people. It's not all on the community to fix this, and it's not all on the government. And what we need is it to work together. And I think it's also important to understand that to do what David Mohammed is talking about, to drive implementation, that means that some people are going to be at the tip of the spear, responsible for providing services on a minute by minute, hour by hour, day by day basis, and others are not. And we have to get comfortable with understanding our various roles, and that not everyone is going to be driving this. And we have to be comfortable with some folks leading and some folks supporting. And I think that's important in government, that we streamline the leadership structure as much as possible. But it's also important for those of us who are not in government to not say, what about me? How is it, what about my role? And say, how can I support this plan? Where do I fit? How can I make the most contribution? And so I think that those are some thoughts. And I'm happy to talk about the group violence intervention as well.
I think both the conversations and the contents of what Thomas is saying, as well as David, pertaining to the strategies and bringing folks together in the senses of partnering. I think that one of the things that's definitely on the table is, how did we do this before? DC is a very unique city with a very interesting characteristic that's primarily in these communities. How did we do it before? We created a term called anecdotal organism, anecdotal organic, anecdotal organic. The concept was, once we were able to negotiate a truce within the city, within our crews, within the community, we were then able to take what we had done to the city for a confirmation on it. If the gangs agreed that the shooting was over, if the police can consent that the shooting was over, if the community organizations can consent that the shooting was over, if the media consent that the shooting is over, then basically we had a organic commitment from those individuals that was involved with it. Then it only took for the government to help us to sustain it. This became a lynching pin within our whole city. The door was open as to once we negotiate, once we went to the youth, once we were able to bring them together and they agreed to stop the violence, then it was a matter of the city coming in to support how to sustain it. And from that particular model was how one of the factors as to how we was able to bring it down to 88, from 484 to 88. It was organically, anecdotal, put in place. And I believe to this day here, because I so often have youth that's coming to me and would say, Tyrone, man, we got some folks that's ready to put down their guns. We got some people that's ready to end it. What do we do next? That is no longer there in that particular perspective as to how it used to be. My last statement is this here. We have got to create a gate where individuals that are able to negotiate truce in the streets, able to talk to these kids and get them to put their guns down, where the city will be able to support this for next steps. That's my perspective as to what I've seen that work. That's what helped us to get across the street a lot better then.
I think, and thank you, Tyrone. And I just want to go back for a minute to using every tool in the toolbox. And one of those tools that has been used and proven by research to be, I believe, the most effective at reducing shootings is either focused deterrence, group violence intervention. It has a few different names, but and it can be done well without harm, I believe, is what I've read in certain places. But that involves what Tyrone is talking about. That involves both the moral voice and the impact of the community being just as strong as police. So both David, Mohammed, and Thomas, I know you know more than any of us on this. If you can just, because I just look for ways that we can get to this goal, and this seems to be one of those things that hasn't happened. I'm not even sure everybody knows what it means, because I've heard people, officials in DC, describe something that is not what I think focused deterrence is, but might be more precision policing. So how does it work, and how does it work well and not do harm to communities?
So why don't I just sort of play my position and sort of summarize the evidence around focused deterrence. David has actually done this work. And so like, let's listen to him on how to, what it actually is and how to do it. But in terms of the research, focused deterrence, or otherwise known as ceasefire, otherwise known as the group violence intervention, otherwise known as group violence intervention. It's very confusing. There's a lot of words for a lot of terms for the same thing. But this is a strategy that's been around since the 90s. And it's been done about 36 times, or it's been done more than that, but it's been evaluated about 36.
David just froze.
Okay.
Hear you?
David, Mohammed, do you mind jumping in? Oh, here you are. You're
Oh,
coming.
I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. So
We have thunderstorms back east. David, Mohammed, you're out west, I think. Can you Can you come in and then Thomas?
Sorry,
can come back? We're going to go to David Mohammed for a minute.
Ironically, we had some pretty darn bad thunderstorms the last 2 days, but we desperately needed any rain we can get. The first rain in 9 months, literally. So a couple pieces. I think want to make sure we come back to Thomas around the research. I put this earlier in the chat, but want to do it again. I just put in a link to a publication that we did summarizing 4 strategies. GVRS, ceasefire, focus deterrence, as I said, it can get confusing. And I even use a different, same GVRS, but a different use gun instead of group. But the, and then street outreach, and which kind of street outreach / cure violence, hospital-based response, and then the Peacemaker Fellowship, which is often known today as Advanced Peace. And so looking at those 4 strategies, we summarize them. But the first one we highlight is this kind of focus deterrence GVRS, with using Oakland as an example. But as Thomas said, several cities have done this. We did it slightly different, with a particular focus of trying to cause no harm. Because I am just directly familiar with versions of this in cities that have done harm, right? And versions of this in cities that, regardless if they've done harm or not, they've not implemented with fidelity. And so I will just, if you bear with me, I just want to very quickly just share screen and talk about this in a way. First, just quickly, I always talk about this, understand what you're trying to achieve and what does when. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but we're talking about this middle column about intervention, right? And so you could have a wonderful youth development program that might be prevention. And if your goal is gun violence, if you've got the exact right youth, maybe you'll have some impact in 5 to 10 years. The other piece on transformation, which is near and dear, I want to eradicate institutional racism for sure, and horrible, dysfunctional lack of investment in our communities. I want Southeast DC to not need a gun violence reduction strategy, just like Upper Northwest really doesn't need it, right? And so, but to do that, we're talking 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now, while we also know that there's strategies that work right now. So with that, I think this is a brief overview of kind of the 4 components of a gun violence reduction strategy: focus deterrence, data-driven identification of the people at highest risk, informing them of their risk, kind of in a public health approach like COVID. If you're over 65 or have underlying health condition, you need to know if you get the virus, your likelihood of extreme illness is exponentially greater than others. There's a small number of people who have extreme likelihood for gun violence, and we need to inform them in a real direct and respectful way. Third, intensive interventions, outreach, interruption, life coaching, that really intensely focuses on the right people and engages them in a relationship, a positive and trusting relationship. And then focused enforcement, right? And as you said, Roger, that some people describe this as just focused enforcement, but that's, and I think one of the things in Thomas's book, we just do enforcement, we're going to fail. If we just do services, we're going to fail, right? That it is a partnership. And the focused enforcement is, it could have the net result of actually a reduced footprint of law enforcement, right? Because so much of what law enforcement is responding to, 911 calls, that when I'm in a smaller audience, I use certain language about it. But let's just say it is things that shouldn't take up a large chunk of police time. And on too little time is taken by serious crime and violence. And so I can go over each one of these an hour each. I've done it before, and I'll stop here and just say it is really this strategy of focusing on and using information we have and data to focus on the very highest risk, engage them intensely with the type of services that we know, often credible messengers, people with similar lived experiences, people who may come from those neighborhoods, may be formerly incarcerated, folks like, the folks at Tyrone's team, Alliance of Concerned Men and others. I see my good friend and colleague, Clinton on here as well. And so right on cue, Rev Motley joins. And so, and then focused enforcement that needs to be done well. These are some units historically that have caused a lot of problems, like jump out boys, gang units, crash units. But here we're talking not about just going and knocking heads. We're talking about really focused on the folks in a data-driven way who are at the very highest risk of gun violence. We can do that in a way that's effective. In the last hour, what I'll just thinking about that, what I'll just show is what we were able to do effectively in Oakland is have 6 consecutive years of decline, a 50% reduction. At the end of March 2020, so a full quarter at the end of 2020, we had a 38% year-to-date reduction in homicides. It would have been the lowest homicide rate in history of Oakland. And then we all know what happened at the end of March 2020. COVID hit and everything went to hell. And so come back to talk about that. But just wanted to share those points. Just basically trying to filibuster until Thomas's internet works.
No, but that's really helpful. And I guess, Thomas, the real question is, in a strategic plan, in a comprehensive plan, there's no one thing that can solve a problem, and it's sort of using every tool that you can, I guess. And so is this part of most cities, most communities' successful drives to reduce shootings and homicides?
Here's what I'll say. I think that there are a number of effective evidence-informed strategies out there to reduce gun violence. And some cities have been effective in reducing gun violence without focused deterrence. That said, it has the strongest evidence base of any other intervention. And the evidence base shows that it doesn't reduce homicides and gun violence by 10% or 15%. It's more like 40% or 45 or even 50%. So it's big results. And so I don't want to suggest that there's any one strategy that you have to use, but there's a lot of good reasons to seriously consider focused deterrence. The first is just the results, but the second is the principles. Focused deterrence is focus, which is what you need, focusing on the highest risk individuals and places. It's also balanced. It's not all enforcement and it's not all prevention. And, I think that people really need to get comfortable with the fact that you're going to need, cops and street outreach workers and service providers all working together. It can't be just one or the other. And then finally, there's this fairness or legitimacy element of focused deterrence. One is that it's involving the community. You got to have folks like Tyrone delivering the moral voice to the community, or it doesn't work. It's engaging with these impacted individuals honestly and saying, your life is at stake. We're concerned about your life and the lives of other people in your community. We are offering you a choice here. You've got to stop shooting. And if you do stop shooting, we're here to help you. And I think that's sort of, I think, why this is a potentially successful strategy. But I don't want to say that you do this or your chances of succeeding are nothing. It's not that clear, but there's a lot of good reasons to do it.
And you mentioned what I think is often described as a twin strategy of building legitimacy and trust. And perhaps you can't even do this without building legitimacy and trust between public safety, law enforcement, and the community. Mr. Parker, would you touch on that for a minute and what it takes to build?
No, I think that, as we look at how do we build legitimate trust among all moving parts, inclusive of DYRS, and when you start looking at that accredited messenger program, which is just profound in the context of teaching the children love and concern and showing commitment while they are there, as well as what's occurring and cure the streets to a large degree. But I say this to say that we as a community are prepared to move forward, to make a difference in our own immediate communities. We have so much natural resources that are there that just need to have a door open for them and the red tape move so that we will not see yellow tape. Red tape in my mindset is producing yellow tape. And the more yellow tape that our community is seeing, the more hopelessness they are feeling. Our objective have got to be twofold. We've got to be able to go to our communities, tap the natural resources that are already there doing the work, need the opportunity to have the support, have a door that's open for them, like Linda Hopper is talking about doing, building relationships, building next steps. If we can bring those moving parts together, then I can see this thing in my mindset. I'm a dreamer. I don't believe that it will take as long as folks may project. I believe that if you got the right people that's in these communities, and let me say this in conclusion, we got so many good people that's involved in these interrupted programs, ceasefire programs, Cure the Streets program, accredited. These people are legitimately sincere and concerned about ending the violence. But we also have the brothers and sisters that are in our correctional facilities that understand the impact on their immediate families, and they want to do things to help. So if we build a bridge, that bridge will be inclusive of everybody that has an investment in our communities. We can turn this ocean liner around. Coordination, like David, Mohammed is saying, like Thomas is saying, is important. But and as important are those individuals that have a desire and a will to do the work that's there and they're waiting. They're waiting.
Yeah, thank you. And David Bowers, if do you want to follow on that?
Yeah, I would just, a couple of things strike me as just fascinating conversation across the board. This notion of, we have a Vision Zero plan in Washington, D.C. to end pedestrian fatalities, and that's a good thing, right? That's a good thing. Like I said, we've had over 3,700 people die in the last 20 years, be murdered, let me be clear, have been murdered in our city. We don't have a Vision Zero plan for that. What are we talking, if you get in your car, used to be in the old day when I ride with my mom and dad road trip, they pull out the map. Map said where you're trying to go and how you're going to get there. If you didn't have a map, you weren't going to get there. Now it's a modern day GPS. What do you do in the GPS? You punch in where you're trying to go. A lot of people like to use Waze. Waze tells you when there's a roadblock ahead. Roads, if there's a speed trap, you got to put in where you're trying to go and have a game plan on how to get there. We don't have that. And now we have many components of it. There have been reports done, Safer, Stronger, DC, and Homicide Elimination Task Force, and all like that. But if somebody asked today, where's the city's plan to end murder, and take me to the office that's their job all day, every day, to just work on that, you know, really, and show me that infrastructure, we don't have that. So then that means by default, we ain't gonna get there. And we haven't been. And the numbers have been getting worse. And let's be clear, behind every number is a name. Sister Hawkins, Brother Parker, others on this line. I get beyond the numbers. They're names. These are real people, real families, real hopes, real dreams. So that's why I said we got to have honest conversation. High school coach, Wilson High School, all said to a kid once, I'll never forget this, 100 years ago, he said, son, I can teach you technique, but I can't teach you heart, right? So the question for me is not the technique, it's the heart. Do we have the heart, the mindset that says we won't have senior elected officials in our city openly having disputes that keep us from working the way we should? Everybody knows that was what was going on. Everybody knows about the nonprofits who might be beefing, right? So whether it's elected officials or nonprofits or this side of town, that side of town, this preacher or that preacher, I'm telling you about what I've heard, what I know, what we know. The man said, grow up, right? So what that means to me is, and I say this as a person born, raised, and living in Ward 3, when the New York Times reporter tragically was mugged, botched response by EMS, his family threatened to sue the district government if they didn't reform the way things were done at EMS. And you know what the city did? It created a task force, came up with a plan to reform EMS. And I tell people, and that's a good thing. That's the way it ought to be. But for some reason, because a lot of these homicides don't happen in Ward 3, where I grew up and where I live, it wouldn't be tolerated here. I'll say that straight. And I know why. It ain't because they would look like, right? So let's have an honest conversation about, are we willing, Black elected officials? Are we willing, white allies who say we care about racial equity? Are we willing, business people? Are we willing, nonprofits? Are we willing, preachers, to say the way we have done this so far has not worked because we ain't at zero, right? And so if we're going to keep doing the same thing, we're going to keep getting the same results. And so until we say we will not tolerate, one, two, build the infrastructure. I keep going back to that. I can preach all day long, but saying it ain't enough. We have to build the systems in government. There's a lot of money. I don't want to hear about, oh, we've got all this federal money now, so we're making much bigger appropriations than we ever have. That's nice. I want to know what system it's going into to build a lasting infrastructure that will be effective, right, at getting the results that we want. I think that's the crux where we are. Last thing I'll say is I'm a member of the Homicide Elimination Strategy Task Force that was referenced earlier. We sent a memo at the end of 2020 to the mayor, to the chair of the city council, saying create this office of homicide elimination, right, and community empowerment, create this infrastructure in the city administrator's office, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's just one marker out there where people have been calling for from various sectors, like, we've got to do this, we've got to build this infrastructure. And when people know that the things that have been created have not been resourced enough for success, that's a problem. And these aren't secrets, right? Again, if we're going to talk, let's talk honestly. If we're going to be on the phone at 8 o'clock on a rainy Monday night, let's talk honestly. People know what's working and not working. People know what's funded and not funded. People know who's beefing and petty, right? So for me, it's like, okay, if we set a system up that mitigates against that stuff, then we may get to a place of having zero. But if we're not willing to do some basic things, right, then we're going to be wasting our time and having the same conversations with just different names 5, 10, 15 years from now.
And I hope that that day will not come. Thank you for your honesty and for your openness. And I think there are two things. One is the glue, because what you're talking about is not just the strategy, but the cohesion between people both within government, elected, appointed officials, but also that cohesion with community to solve the problem. And then the other part is the answers are in the community, but we need to give the community the resources necessary to solve the problem. We wanted to give more time for questions from the chat, but Rachel, do you want to just bring a couple in? And I'm sorry we didn't have more time for that.
Yes, thank you so much to the panel and to everyone for all of the excellent comments in the chat. I wanted, since we don't have a lot of time, I wanted to just elevate one of them from Reverend Adora Lee. Thank you so much for bringing up trauma, because this is a critical piece of the puzzle. So her question was, can the panel also speak to the need to address trauma that many perpetrators of violence live with every day of their lives? Doesn't this also contribute to the homicide elimination situation? And whoever would like to jump in and try to answer that first, that'd be great.
Yeah, I'll just start quickly and just say, there's one, yes, right? The trauma is a huge issue, and there's various layers and forms and ways to address it. But specifically around this population, as I think was asked, around perpetrators, as obviously as well as victims of gun violence, one of the effective approaches is something called cognitive behavior therapy, and there are kind of new iterations of it that are trauma informed and trauma focused cognitive behavior therapy. There are versions that we've been involved with that really try to make it culturally relevant to the population, right? Because there's some really like, curriculums that don't work for the population we're talking about, right? Even if the content is good. And so we've been a part of a few processes to kind of marry that good content with more culturally relevant ways of delivering. And that can be effective, right? Let alone the trauma that folks come into it about how they even get involved in gun violence, right? And so there's a ton of study on adverse childhood experiences and toxic trauma that we've experienced in childhood that put us in situations where we're victims and perpetrators of gun violence. And then that further exacerbates the trauma, creates new trauma. So there's a lot of need to address that, and a lot of need for training of folks on how to address that.
Thank you. Thomas, do you want to add anything to that?
No, we're short on time, and I think David nailed it, so I think we're good.
Excellent. Well, I'll turn it back to Roger then. I think you might have one closing comment if we have, or a question if we have time.
I guess the final question for each of you is just quickly, and I want to thank each of you and everyone who has joined us. Really appreciate so many people making time, being part of this, and am grateful for your role going forward, because it will take all of us. I guess final question, and we'll start with Mr. Parker and then everybody else. If you had just one piece of advice for the mayor or a council member here in DC, what would that be?
I think what I was saying, I've repeated it before. We've got to move the red tape, because the red tape is producing yellow tape, and the yellow tape is producing hopelessness in our community. Open up the doors and let our community become more involved with conclusions, input, and decision-making components of this. We've got to do that, because without the community at the table, we will not have a solution. The solutions are in the community. Remove the red tape.
Thomas, will you go next?
Sure. I've sort of consulted and done this work all around the country, and I've seen some great successes, but unfortunately I've also seen a bunch of failures. So I just want to sort of say maybe what to avoid rather than what to do. I would say the main thing is don't get distracted, don't lose focus. I think it's very easy, and many cities fail to focus on the violence itself, and they get distracted by broader issues and don't really focus on the primary mission, which should be simply saving lives. I think the second thing is that following from that is they don't often focus on the people whose lives need to be saved, the people at the highest risk for violence, and in the places that are most impacted by violence. So if you want to be successful, you have to go right at this problem. You can't work around the edges. You have to go right at it. And Tyrone is nodding. And then the third thing I would say is you've got to have a clear leadership and management structure to hold folks accountable and say, we are about this business of saving lives, and that is your job, and we are going to hold you accountable, and we want to know who is responsible. And I think that having a very clear leadership and management structure that is within government, but that can connect, as Tyrone said, with these community-based organizations and get aligned with them is critical. So stay focused, maintain focus.
That's great, thank you. And alphabetically, we'll go to David Bowers next.
Sure. Thanks, Roger. And again, many thanks to you and Rachel and Peace for DC and for all you all for attending tonight. First thing I would say is that leadership in the city across the board, public and private sector, needs to publicly say that one murder is one murder too many, and that we as a city refuse to tolerate anything where we don't get to zero. Be clear on the goal. That's number one. Number two, the second thing I would say is build it into the code. And by that, I mean, and I'm holding the memo right here that was sent right back in December to the mayor, to the chair of the council, create this Office of Homicide Elimination. And again, I believe that the gun violence prevention director position is all the way there. So the beginnings are there. Just bolster the infrastructure, be clear on the mission, clear on the infrastructure, give it the resources it needs. Director Harper and that office, the resources that they need to create and implement, execute that plan where, again, tomorrow, next week, a year from now, 5 years from now, 20 years from now, people will know, oh yeah, I can go to the Office of Homicide Elimination. And there will be people there and an infrastructure with the power of the office of the mayor who are working consistently with all government agencies and private sector, for-profit and nonprofit groups to get us to zero and keep us at zero. So one murder is one murder too many. Say it often, early, often, all the time. Acknowledge the humanity behind those numbers, and two, build it into the code, the infrastructure, resource it adequately, and let's get to zero.
Thank you. David Mohammed, I'm going to change the question because you will actually be giving a piece of advice to the mayor and the council. So what would be your advice to those of us outside of government, community organizations, advocates? What would your advice be for us?
Yeah, and let me just for folks who don't know what Roger's referring to, let me say two things. My organization, National Center for Criminal Justice Reform, in partnership, and I see Manon Butler here, who is the head of the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council, who's been awesome at declaring this. We need the coordination, we need focus, we need strategic plan, and so against my will, she got me. No, so we've been working together. One, we're in the final steps of a detailed analysis of gun violence in the district. And so we looked at 2 years of every single individual incident of homicide and non-fatal shooting, and looked at victim, suspect dynamics. And so we will be providing that report to the public soon. Building on that, we're also working with Director Holly Harper at Building Blocks and others throughout the city, the One's office and others, to develop a strategic plan on gun violence reduction. And so, you know, they had me working from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. literally last week on this in DC. But we need to do that all the time, constantly, because folks are way more important on the ground doing incredible life-saving work. And so I'm just happy to try to understand that, learn from those folks. And so to that end, I would ask for you all, I just put an email in the chat that if you're interested, if you have information, if you have suggestions, if you have ideas, if you want to be a part of one of the several groups that we're going to meet with to hear your ideas around the strategic plan, please send us an email and let us know you want to be a part of it, or send us your thoughts, send us your ideas. Because as several folks said, there's structure, there's funding. We also, you know, fighting for funding is a big part of the disunity. But ultimately, community is going to do it, right? And so community has the knowledge, the passion, the skin in the game, is going to do the work. And so we need to hear from you. But this partnership between government and community, which DC has examples of already, that's what's going to put us over the finish line. And so I'm just thankful to be in this spot, to be able to help pull things together. So look forward to hearing from folks on that.
And thank you for sharing that, because as we said at the beginning, this is not meant to be a community conversation, and those are critical, and those will come. Thank you on our panel. Thank each of you for giving us your time, Thank you for the work that you're doing. And to those on the call who are risking their lives, putting real time and effort in this, in the community, you inspire me, you make me want to do more, and I'm just trying to do a small piece to elevate the conversation and the work that you're doing, and to help bring more resources and attention to the goal, as David Bowers said, of no murders in DC and peace for every child, for every person in every neighborhood and on every block in our city. Thank you all for being here this evening. We're really grateful, and we look forward to continuing on this journey together.